Hello, my name is Chris. I'm head of GamesIndustry.biz and welcome to a special series of GI Academy videos all around finding work, which will cover job applications, CVs, interviews, salary negotiations and much more. This series is in reaction to the current situation in video games where thousands of games employees have been made redundant as part of a correction that's going on in the industry at the moment. We're not going to cover the whys and wherefores around that, although if you do want to follow this developing situation, may I suggest subscribing to the GI newsletter. It's completely free, it comes out daily, covers all the big issues in the business. Just head to the GamesIndustry.biz website, click on newsletters at the top and put in your email, and hopefully that will be useful for you. Our first video today is going to cover what to do when you've been made redundant, where to look for work, how to apply, including advice around CVs and covering letters and applications and all sorts. I am not an expert in this, but our speaker today very much is, and he is Alan Dixon, Principal Consultant at recruitment specialist Amiqus. Hello Alan, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, glad to be here.
There's a lot of it's been really depressing writing about it, but there's been a lot of redundancies out there. How are you finding sort of the people you're speaking to? How are you finding that they are doing?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, we're speaking to a lot of people that have been made redundant at the moment, and I think now is as good a time as any to. There's a lot of sort of practical tips and a lot of, if you've been made redundant, quick, do this, do that, and hopefully we'll cover some of those today. But I just wanted to acknowledge that I've spoke to a lot of candidates about these calls actually in these videos to say what would you like to be heard, and I think the general consensus is that people are feeling really almost like grief-like feelings about losing their job, which is totally understandable. They're losing their stability, their income for an undetermined amount of time, and often, especially within games, that they've invested a lot of emotional capital in that job. It's very rarely just a job in games. So I just want to acknowledge that a lot of people who are watching this might be feeling those feelings, and that is totally 100% valid. The things I don't think you should be feeling are guilt or any sort of shame. These redundancies are not your fault. The industry as a whole, the demand for video games is still there, as I'm sure Chris has written about many a times, and your skills are still in demand. So I just want to kind of reassure people that whatever you're feeling is right, but try not to feel guilty or any sense of shame. It certainly isn't looked down upon by people who are hiring that you've been made redundant.
That's good to hear. It's difficult out there. It's competitive.
It is.
So sort of in practical terms, if someone's been given notice they've lost their job, what should they do?
Well, first of all, they should look. The ideal first thing that they should do is look for a job, is try to identify where these jobs are being advertised. Now, it should be said that once a job is advertised on GI.biz or Games Jobs Direct or something like that, or by a recruiter like myself, it's already been live for weeks, possibly a month or so. Internally, they may look at their own networks, they may put it on their own social networks before choosing to pay an agency or for ad revenue. So a job advert is definitely one place that you can find live roles. And I think it's almost like where to look. There's a lot of noise out there, especially on LinkedIn, which is really good. A lot of people getting tagged, a lot of things getting shared for vacancies, which is brilliant. But a couple of other things I wanted to just put out there. So first of all, it might sound really obvious, but indeed, it's a really good aggregate of job boards. And really, you should be looking, rather than looking at games as a keyword, you should be looking at the skill set you have. What we're seeing as an agency is a lot of SEAM industries, especially things like simulation developers, sort of serious game developers. They're utilizing the skills that you have, especially within VR and specifically Unity C#. So look on Indeed. Don't just narrow it down to the games industry. Look at the skills that you have as well, and that also goes alongside things like production and marketing roles and sales roles, where those skills are very transferable out of industry. But within the industry, gamesjob.live, GamesIndustry.biz jobs page is really good and up to date. Tiger.org jobs, Games Jobs Direct, obviously Amiqus, of course, but there are other agencies, Aardvark, Datascope. They have their live
Other agencies do exist.
They do, yeah, just to clarify, they are available. And things like, again, LinkedIn. LinkedIn can be a bit of a time warp, it's sort of a time sink, as can Twitter. You can go down a bit of a rabbit hole with it. Try and use it, but try and be sensible with using it. Sometimes a lot of things get shared and not relevant to you. They're not in the right geographical area. So try and be sensible with it. I would say LinkedIn's really good for a lot of things, as well as job hunting, such as utilizing your network is probably the most simple thing that I would do. A lot of companies, they will ask their staff to share a role on LinkedIn before they advertise it. So maybe look at ex-colleagues, people that work with another studio, maybe in the same area, and those are the people I'd be linking in with. And don't just look at LinkedIn jobs, look at what people are saying and what people are sharing. Two other things that I think get overlooked is games websites. Studio websites. So if you've always thought about working for a specific studio and really enjoyed the material they've put out, look at their website. A lot of companies will advertise on their website, but that won't for some reason scrape through to Indeed or GamesIndustry.biz, or they won't pay for advertising slots on LinkedIn. They are expensive. So look at those websites, especially if you're in a hub, so Leamington Spa, Guildford, London. Look at those studios that are local to you. Especially if you can get on site, that is definitely going to put you up the ranking of applicants. One last sort of source that I use personally that always gets overlooked is the UK Dev Map. So type into Google UKIE Dev Map, and it's an interactive map that's really, really useful. It lists all of the UK members, and what I would do, this is what I do when I do business development, I would look into where I lived, I would zoom into that place, start slowly zooming out, and those businesses will pop up, and I guarantee you there'll be places on there, companies on there that you have never heard of that are doing really, really valuable work. And a great example of that is a lot of the time work for hire studios are outsourcing. A lot of those studios don't really get the sort of advertisement, the sort of marketing that sort of core IP holders or publishers would typically get, but they're working on games. And what we've seen is, for example, outsourcers, because of redundancies, are actually getting more work. So use the UK Dev Map, try and be a bit more strategic about where you look. And we've listed sort of 6 or 7 different places there. And try and spread out where you're actually physically looking for a job.
It's interesting when because my first job in video games was at University Speaking, which is a games testing agency in Cambridgeshire. I didn't realise there was. I was looking for jobs in video games, and I thought it was all Bath or London or even Cambridge, but I largely thought that was just Jagex. And then I put in video games in Cambridgeshire, and University Speaking came up, which is actually in the town I live in, and I didn't know there was a games company round the corner from me, and that's my first entry. Well, so let's say they've sort of they found a job they like the look of, or like the sound of. Anyway, it sounds interesting. What's the next step? What's the next piece of advice that you would?
So it's easy for me to say just apply, but research the website. Check out the website. The studio website. Look at their social media channels. Look at their LinkedIn. Look at things like their Glassdoor reviews if they have any. Try and understand their sort of culture, the values, the project. Look at the team, the departments that they have. Some studios might not have the kind of department for the skills that you're looking for, so that's maybe something that you can add to that studio. So try and just get a bigger picture of the studio if you can, and then ask yourself: is this a studio you want to work for? Based on what you've seen, is it something you want? Is it somewhere you could see as a destination that you could be working? Review the job spec. A lot of people, they do apply to roles that aren't relevant. I think the extreme examples you get sometimes graduates applying to sort of technical director roles, and you get people, for example, I'll give an example, marketing. There's product marketing managers, there's product managers, and then there's product owners. There's numerous job titles. So read the job spec thoroughly, really try and understand, is this what I'm looking for? And is this relevant to me? If you've got more transferable skills, try and identify maybe the gaps where you think, okay, I haven't got that, but I have got this, and address those differences in a cover letter and try and bespoke that cover letter to that specific organization or that specific job. But what I would say is job adverts and job descriptions, sometimes they're interchangeable. A lot of people, a lot of hiring managers will put a lot of qualifications, or this is what we'd like to see from you, and it is a bit of a wish list. And it's been proven, again, with research, that women specifically often go down a requirements list and eventually rule themselves out of applying for a job because they feel that I don't tick all of the boxes. The two two most important boxes are the top two, really, and it's always fairly straightforward. If it's a game programming role and they're looking for someone with Unity, C#, if you've got that, then really you're sort of, although it's only 2 points, you're sort of 75% of the way there. Yes, they might be looking for some shader experience or working on a particular platform, but those kind of things are a bit of a nice to have. So really make sure it's hitting those foundation requirements. And if you are, again, considering your loading bar at 75%, not at sort of 20%. And really, you should be applying for that job. If you're reading it and thinking, this is a role I could do, but it's not that relevant, it doesn't feel relevant, I would say keep your powder dry, and wait for a role that's more relevant to pop up, or get in touch with them directly and say, I saw this role, it's similar to what I used to do, but this is actually the skill set I have. Do you have anything in the pipeline that might be more relevant to me? So yeah, so you found a job, research it, make sure you do want to apply, look at the job spec, make sure you're relevant for it. If there's some gaps there, address that in a cover letter, and make sure that you do apply to roles. Don't, it's as well as good making it relevant, but don't count yourself out, especially if there's a long list of things. X amount of years experience I see in job specs a lot, 6 years, and someone with 5 years wouldn't apply to that role. What are you gaining in that 12 months? So, really try and take these things with a pinch of salt. If you've got those top two, go for it.
Yeah. You mentioned Glassdoor at the beginning of that, and I use Glassdoor a little bit when I'm interested in looking at studios. But I will say that you do get people who may have the grievances or may have left a while ago they tend to crop up there. So it might not be an entire accurate depiction of the studio. No. We do a project called Best Places to Work Awards, which does survey everybody, and there's always somebody somewhere in a particularly big studio who may have had a difficult experience. But if you look at the winners on something like that, then they tend to be.
Yeah,
and
that's a great shout.
Broadly speaking, most people who take part in the Best Place to Work Awards, unfortunately, we don't announce everyone who takes part. It tends to score very highly, that's always that's also another option. So once they've applied and once they like the job, they've looked it up, they think, okay, I want to apply. What needs to be on the CV? That's the thing. Interesting. I always get a lot of different advice on CVs, so I'll be interested to hear yours.
So what needs to be on your CV? Contact details. The first and foremost, you need to be contactable, and that should be email, a link to your LinkedIn, a link to your portfolio, and phone number. If you want to put a rough location of where you're based, you don't have to put your address, but if you want to put a location of where you're based, that's also really, really handy. You want to list your experience in reverse chronological order, so start at the most recent and work your way back. You want to keep that detailed, so that the bullet points underneath that need to be pertinent, they need to be tangible, they need to be detailed, and also they need to be universally sort of readable. So some studios I worked with a studio recently where some of their job titles and some of the things they were using in internal processes, very jargony. Everyone in that studio understands what it is, but try and think, is this understandable for someone who works in recruitment that isn't in the industry, or possibly doesn't know the ins and outs of my studio? So translate it, really make it accessible, I suppose is what I'm saying, so that people really understand what you do. When I say tangible, I'm talking about, if you say I manage a team of developers, how many people are in that team? Is it multidiscipline? Are they all developers? Is it 20 people multidiscipline? Is it a team of 2? Try and give as much life as you can to the experience that you've got, and that allows people to really understand your experience, and it allows people to understand how it may translate to their business. Likewise, list things like platforms, engines, art packages, anything that you've used that other people in the games industry use. List it so that they can understand that you've got that experience. Your responsibilities, achievements, and challenges. So I would talk about achievements in the sense of completed projects, or if you've been specifically responsible for one thing on the game, or maybe you've just been really proud of a team that you were in, that you were fixing something that was really challenging with the title, or if it's not specifically in the development of games, so marketing's a great example. You might want to talk about something that you've taken to launch, and if there's any freely available statistics around that launch that you can share that won't compromise any NDAs you've signed, I think that's also really worth sharing as well. It's a big achievement. Talk about some things that go unnoticed that I think some people miss is little opportunities. So for example, did a junior join your team and you took them under your wing and you gave them informal mentoring? I think that's worth mentioning. Don't talk it up. You weren't a manager, or you weren't directly responsible for L&D, but say in a bullet point, mentored a junior artist for 3 to 6 months. They completed their probation. I think that's really good. Those kind of things, especially if you're not a lead or senior, are really good to include in your CV. Any courses, training, workshops that you've attended, put those in. And with the games industry specifically, I would also put in any events, key events that you've attended. That just paints a bigger picture about yourself, about your knowledge, about your immersion in the industry, and I think it's really relevant. One thing I actually saw a thread on Twitter to say not to do this, but I would also include hobbies and interests, especially in games. Games is a very people driven environment, people driven studios and teams. So people like to know who they're hiring. Everyone in games seems to have really cool hobbies as well. So it's a nice talking point. And sometimes these hobbies, they won't get you the job maybe, but they'll definitely be a talking point within an interview. A lot of people share the same hobbies within games. So if you are a dungeon master for D&D, or if you play, tabletop games, I had someone that in their own time created cosplay armor and armaments for like live like role playing with like knights and shields and stuff and helmets and things like that, and that actually did get him the job because he didn't have any games experience. So they saw that and were like, oh, this guy's super passionate about this kind of about us really. So include those hobbies and interests. There's a lot of things about the content in your CV. Try and keep it punchy. Try and keep it relevant, try and keep it pertinent, but add in that bit of you in there. Good tip is ask someone that you respect outside of the industry to read it. So they might just ask you something that's like, what is that? I don't understand. And you'll be like, oh, I didn't even think that was like particularly hard to digest, but it can just give you that second pair of eyes outside the industry that can give you that last bit of last few tips.
It's interesting you talked about some people would advise not to do these things, and it is a bit of a I know that we'll talk about formatting your CV, right? But one of the pieces of advice that I suspect you'll give about formatting your CV is put a professional email address on it, right? If you've got a funny personal email, don't use that. However, to contradict that piece of advice is that when I first applied for my job in the games media, I put my email address, which was dringostar@hotmail.com, which is on the thing. And the people who reviewed this, because the guy who was a big Beatles fan thought it was hilarious.
Right.
And it was actually, it benefited me in getting an interview by doing that. That's not advice to follow.
I don't think that's the most unprofessional I've seen. It's always the ones that were set up in the 80s. I'm talking towards millennials with Hotmail. It's always a Hotmail account that has like the weird username. But yeah, no, you're right. Just to check it, obviously spelling and things like that. But I mean, nice segue into formatting really. One thing I would say is that there's often a rule about 2 pages, 1 page. Look, if it goes beyond 3 pages, I think there's possibly too much in there. But yeah, 2 to 3 pages is about right. There's a lot of people with a lot of experience out there, and sometimes if a game's not launched, which is often the case, and it's been cancelled, you need to be more descriptive about that title or about the project, because how else do you account for like maybe 4 years of work? So I do think that as long as it's relevant, I think it's definitely worth putting in. But I think if it goes beyond 3 pages, maybe reach out to your recruiter if you have contact with them, or someone else in that sort of arena that can give you some advice on how to chop that down a bit, because it will be too long. Consider the formatting. I see an array of resumes. The hardest ones to digest are actually the better looking ones. A lot of artists tend to put like really nice, like very like UI UX thought out CVs, and they're very picture heavy. They can be graphic heavy, graphs to show how much experience you've got and things like that. These aren't really easy to read, and they're a bit difficult. So my advice would be to keep it to text, put some formatting in there, to make it a bit different. There's some decent templates out there on the internet. It really shouldn't be that difficult to find a good template that you're happy with. Don't over design it though. You need to make it really easy to read, especially when there's a lot of competition. A recruiter or hiring manager needs to open it, and he needs to smack him in the face that yes, this is a producer. I can see it. It says producer, and I can see that this person is that. If they have to sort of work to find that out, it just makes life a bit more difficult. Put your most relevant experience first. Of course, proofread before you send it. Get someone else to read it yourself. Use professional email address always. I think in terms of font choice and everything, colors, as long as it's readable. The ones with black backgrounds and white writing, I don't particularly like them personally. So personally, I like CVs that are PDFs, white background, plain writing, some level of formatting that makes it like quite cool, like a column of skills on the side or things like that. But generally speaking, it should be very readable. There's also a lot of talk about gaps on your CV. Gaps are not a problem. For whatever reason, I've placed people coming back from maternity leave. I've placed people coming back from taking time out because they had just a bit of a mental health crisis, and they went through relationship issues, and a parent died, and things like that, and they were like, I don't know what to write. Do I give War and Peace? And I think it's just really about putting down something that accounts for that time. So use it as if it's just another job section. So instead of the job name of the studio, you'd put you can even just put time out. You can put maternity leave. You can put sabbatical, and put the dates so that it's accountable for, and just put underneath a brief description with what you're comfortable with. And you can even say, providing medical care to an ill family member, took time out to travel, took time out to work on personal projects, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be a lie. It should be as close to the truth as possible. But it's your information. You don't have to give warts and all what that situation is. So I'd say gaps on the CV, I don't avoid them. I would fill them in and give that information, and information that you're confident in saying out loud to someone if they ask you about it as well. If you feel it might trigger some emotions, then I think that's something that you need to be careful about what you put in there, because obviously whatever you put in there is going to reflect what they say. Just try and think on about that if you do that.
My tip is don't use Comic Sans. If you're going to, you've got the CV.
Yep.
You're happy with it. You've got it proofed. You've had someone else look at it. They've called you out on any jargon they don't understand, and you've picked the studio obviously, and you're about to send it off. This is the bit that I sometimes, whenever I get to this bit, I always look for advice on actually how do I send this? What do I say in the email? What do I put in the? That's the bit where. So what advice do you have for that part?
So often there's an online sort of portal that you have to put your details in, which is fairly self-explanatory. Sumo Digital, great example. You pass your CV, takes your details. You can put sort of a commentary. So that's where you put your cover letter. I think cover letters, again, it's more about, it's kind of like the same advice with the resume. Keep it succinct, keep it tangible, keep it pertinent, and I wouldn't give a life history. I see hundreds of cover letters, and they all seem to start the same way, which is by saying, I've been in love with games since I got a Spectrum console for Christmas, which is valid and which is fine. But I think there's maybe an interview might be better to talk about that. I think really with the cover letter, it should be, this is the role I'd love to do. This is why I think I'll be right for the role. I'd love to hear from you. Keep it punchy, keep it sharp. Don't try anything too wild. I've had some really odd applications with odd subject lines to get my attention, and it just feels a bit grubby. So maybe don't do that. Just keep it professional. Put a bit of personality in there, of course. It doesn't have to be a robot, but yeah, try and keep it pertinent and to the point. Tailor that for the application, and that can be laborious, but it doesn't have to be, so historical and so thought out. It can be just, I love what you've done. This game in particular is really cool. I'd love to learn more. Would you be able to talk to me about it? Or I saw this role really appeals to me because this is why I can add value. That is also tailoring it. So even if you don't know too much about the studio or the project, you should know why you're applying, and that should be apparent in your cover letter. So there's a portal that you can do, and that should give you the chance to either attach a cover letter or be able to free type it in a box. If it's via email, drop them an email. Subject line, your name, your CV, and the role title. So it might be Alan Dixon, recruitment consultant, Amiqus, something like that. Normal professional email. Hi, saw this advert, really interested. Again, kind of cover letter-esque text, and then attach your CV. One thing I've got a real big bugbear about is CV file names. So a lot of people somehow put it in code. They'll put their initials of the year and the month, or they'll date it. Now, it's all well and good putting the date, but the amount of times I get CVs that have the wrong date on it from, say, 6 months ago, it's like, oh, were you looking for a job 6 months ago? Or, it just feels like not up to date. So personally, I would just put first name, last name, space, CV, keep it really clean, and put in there a little note to say, I've got, here's my resume. I'd love to hear back. If not, any feedback is welcome. Try and put a call to action at the end so that people do get back to you. So that's how you do it, really. That's mostly two options. If there's a role that you see on Twitter or you see on LinkedIn or a social media type advertisement where they're sort of saying DM me, get in contact, personally, that's fine. DM them, get in touch with them, and ask for an email address. What I wouldn't do is just send your CV. It just doesn't land well. You need some context. So, yeah, that's what I would do. Is say to them, saw your post, would love to find out more. Can I have an email address, and I'd love to send you my application, and then send it via email. That's what I'd do. Sorry, Chris. The last point I would say about this is keep a record of all your applications. In Excel, fire up a spreadsheet, name of studio, date, role, and then sort of, a final column of, did you hear feedback or anything like that. That's really important because sometimes if you duplicate applications, it doesn't always look particularly great. Sometimes in an application system, if you've applied within the last 6 months, it won't accept a new application. And likewise, if you go through a recruiter and you've already applied to that same role and that duplicates, it's just you're wasting your time. You won't be able to do anything about it. So the best thing to do is keep a record of all the applications you make. It just has to be a simple spreadsheet, and that way you just keep a track of everything. And that is also good for going back to that spreadsheet after a week or so and maybe chasing those people if you've not heard anything, if you know the identity or the individual involved.
When I got my first job in the games media, what really won it for me was I applied for a job on MCV, which is used to be at the time a weekly video games magazine. I read it every week, and I read it so much and became such a fan of it. I was writing articles for an amateur website based on things I was reading in MCV. So nice. I turned up with a portfolio of work that was basically inspired by articles that publication produced. And I felt like I'd already got the job when I walked through into the interview, because they'd read my work and went, this guy's perfect. So I know how important portfolios are. Obviously, it's very different from the media side than it is on the game development side. But how important is it, and what do you recommend when it comes to portfolios?
Portfolios are crucial, and for creative roles especially, are animation, potentially audio, but definitely video editing, those kind of things. Really, they'll look at your CV to say, okay, this person's done the job, but even if you haven't got that stronger level of experience, the first thing they'll look to, and really, especially if a creative person is reviewing it, is your portfolio, and that's what they will judge. Now, if you're watching this and you've got a lot of experience, what happens is your portfolio is great until you get your first or second job, and then thanks to NDAs, project, development time lengths, your portfolio stagnates a little bit and it becomes a bit out of date. So portfolio is super crucial. There's art, design, audio, animation show reels. You can even, UI UX designers can show sort of work in progress. So there's a very different formats. So I won't go through, advice for each and individual one. I'm happy to do it on an individual basis and give feedback. But broadly speaking, so first of all, the link to the portfolio, make sure it works. That's probably the biggest stopper to seeing a portfolio. Make sure it doesn't need a password. Make sure it's live. Make sure if you're hosting it on a website that those things are paid for. If it's on ArtStation, just make sure it's still live and everything like that. So make sure it's easy to access. So if you've got a portfolio, it should be really with your contact details. It should be easy to find on your LinkedIn profile, which, by the way, LinkedIn we can sort of talk about with portfolios as well, because I do feel that they're kind of a portfolio for people at the moment, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So make sure it's easy to access, make sure it's easy to navigate. So if you've got art, for example, try and give sort of broad brackets to that art. Is it stuff that you did in university? Have you got art that's just from game jams? Have you got personal stuff? Have you got, a lot of artists have traditional art skills. Have you got a list of, a section for drawings, for illustrations that maybe you've done? So try and make sure it's easy to navigate. People know what they're looking at. I think that the most crucial thing for portfolios is making sure that they're well annotated. So give context. If you've got a really amazing environment and that you're really, really pleased with it, when did you do it? What tools did you use? What engine is it in? Did it take you a long time? Was it a paint over? Was it in a game jam? The quality of those work should be quite different. If it's something that you've done professionally or something you've done very quickly as part of a game jam, it might be completely different. So without that context, they wouldn't know. So give a bit of context. Again, doesn't have to be War and Peace. Can be just a list of bullet points. Give the year when it was done. Give the tools that you did. Maybe just a bit of context. So, for example, if someone gave you the concept art for a character, maybe link to that concept and say, well, this is the 3D character I did. from this concept. And if there's any work in progress shots, people love to see that. Artists don't always like to show it because they feel like it doesn't look good, and I get that. But people who are hiring artists like to see you're working out, much like, maths exams that we've all done. So make sure it's well annotated. Put your best work up front. Quality over quantity. So as much as putting as much in there and keeping up to date is super important. If you do feel that this really just isn't anywhere near to your work at the moment, then leave it out. If you just think it's completely irrelevant, leave it out. So make sure it's all good quality. I think diversity of content as well. As much as you want good quality content, if it's just filled with just sci-fi or just fantasy, that's not always going to be super pertinent for the studio you're going to go to. So do try and put a bit of versatile sort of artwork in there. Again, talking about art, but it does pertain to other disciplines. I do acknowledge that can be hard if you've not worked on that game or that type of genre, and then you go home and you think, last thing I want to do now is more of the same but a different genre. So I get that, but try and be mindful of it. If there's old work that you've not shown that you can put on there that's a different sort of genre or different style, that's really important. Don't be afraid to include personal work. You can put it on Wix, GitHub, ArtStation, and you can look at other portfolios sort of hosting solutions, but they're the most sort of famous ones. So there's a list of things there for portfolios. Make sure it's up to date, versatile, easy to navigate, well annotated. Put some personal work in there if you have it, and I think crucially add that context and make sure people can see it.
Okay. So I think that covers. We've covered everything in terms of applying for a job. Have we got to the end of that?
I think there's only one thing else I want to address, which is LinkedIn. So with LinkedIn, it kind of doesn't come under the CV portfolio, but actually it is really important that you present yourself on LinkedIn. So your LinkedIn and your portfolio and your CV should all be, broadly speaking, reflective of one another. You don't have to put as much detail on LinkedIn because some of it might be, private, obviously, or quite commercially sensitive. But do make sure that your LinkedIn is filled out. The other thing I want to say about LinkedIn is put a current picture up there, make sure your contact details, make sure the information is accurate and up to date, because a lot of recruiters, a lot of people, hiring managers will instantly look to LinkedIn as well. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the open to work banner. There seems to be, bizarrely, controversy around using this. I honestly don't no idea where this comes from. As a recruiter, I can tell you I have a recruiter license for LinkedIn. And when I search for people, one of the filters I can search on is of open to work. And they are the first people I come to, because why wouldn't I look for someone that's looking for a job as well? So definitely put open to work banner on, especially if you've been made redundant. It's public knowledge, it's fine. There is just no problem. You might get seen to first if it's got that open to work banner on it. There is absolutely no shame, and I've never come across anybody who sees that as a negative, ever, apart from one sort of influencer, American fella on LinkedIn. I have no idea where his thought process is with that. It doesn't look desperate whatsoever. It's totally fine. But yeah, mirror your LinkedIn to your portfolio, put links to your portfolio and your CV. LinkedIn can now host it. If you haven't got a CV, one easy way of getting a super quick one is on LinkedIn, you can go to your own profile, you can click more, and you can click save as PDF. And straight away, it passes your LinkedIn profile onto a PDF. The formatting's not very nice. It doesn't look brilliant, and the detail's not always there. But it's a really good template to just start with. So just a last bit of little bit of housekeeping there for something to do. So yeah, but I think that's us.
Okay, well, brilliant. Well, this is part one. We've got a lot more to talk about, but thank you, Alan. Hopefully that was super useful for those watching. I certainly learned a lot. Please do check out our second video, which we'll link in the description, which is all around the job interview process. That's a big one, tactics, advice around that. And we'll also our third video, actually, which will cover all things to consider sort of after an interview, what to do with the job offer and negotiations and all that sort of thing. Again, all those links will be in the description. And if you want to keep up to date with what's going on in the games business, do subscribe to the GamesIndustry.biz newsletter. Until next time, good luck and thank you for watching.